It is happening everywhere. Of course, there are four markets, namely Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya, that attract almost 80% of the investment. But the rest is going to 26 more countries. So it is a total of 30 markets that are attracting this type of investment, and it's growing daily. It is also happening in all sectors. Financial sector, of course, with fintechs, but also commerce, health, education, mobility, agriculture, with potential to impact profoundly all of these sectors. And then we must note, though, that this is driven mostly by US and European VCs and angel investors. I will come back to this later. Now, to take a concrete example, our first investment was in 2018 in Nigeria in a company called Trade Depot. Trade Depot digitizes the small and informal retailers who drive 95% of the distribution of fast-moving consumer products in Africa. This is a very large market that impacts the daily lives of Africans everywhere. Trade Depot first offered to these retailers, when they run out of stock on a product, instead of closing their shop and going through traffic to the open market to resupply, to use a very simple app to order their stock and be delivered the next day. In fact, 99.5% of the orders are served within 24 hours. They now serve more than 100,000 retailers, mostly in Nigeria. Even more interestingly, they've used the transaction history from these retailers, and they've raised a $75 million debt vehicle to provide working capital financing to these retailers. They are building even more on this platform thanks to, again, deep technology, using it to create efficiencies. Why am I telling you about Trade Depot? It illustrates, we believe, perfectly what digital innovation in Africa is about. It's applied to an existing value chain that is foundational to our economies. Then this digitization brings on board hundreds of thousands of players in this very fragmented and informal space, and gives opportunities to organize them and create efficiencies. And then as a secondary effect, it enables access to financing to these retailers, 60% of whom are women, with qualified transaction data. So this is great, but it isn't enough. Trade Depot, for instance, is only serving 0.2% of its market. And then beyond Trade Depot, there are many other trade depots waiting to happen. In commerce, of course, in financial services, but also in agriculture, in mobility, everywhere. While last year, 650 startups raised money, tickets above $200,000, as we measure it, we must keep in mind that this is very likely a very small fraction of the project that we're seeking funding. For instance, if we compare our region to Latin America, with half of the population, Latin America is seeing 4 times more investment in the technology space. And it's still growing 300% year over year. So just to catch up with Latin America, we would need to immediately multiply by 8 the amount of investment in digital innovation in Africa. So there is still a very large gap. Now, to drive more innovation, let's step back a bit on where it is coming from. Of course, there is first an overall improving macroeconomic improvement that is driving the emergence of a growing pool of urban consumers. And these urban consumers are coming online with access and adoption of internet. This is driven, of course, by an ongoing investment in broadband infrastructure and the penetration of smartphones, of course. Third, there is a large and growing pool of entrepreneurial and technical talent in Africa. This pool is created not only by traditional universities, but also by the emergence of these coding schools, incubators, tech hubs as we call them. There are more than 1,200 of them right now in Africa, supporting each 10 to 50 projects every year. And then lastly, there is the recent arrival of risk-taking capital in our market. With many years of increased abundance of capital in the tech space, there were investors looking for new opportunities in frontier markets who were attracted to Africa. We have to ask ourselves what happened as there is a downturn in this space. Now, how do we deliver more of this digital innovation then in Africa? Well, of course, we must keep investing in the digital infrastructure. The broadband infrastructure in Africa is not nearly where it needs to be to support the growing demand, and even more importantly, to give all Africans equal access to online services. Second, we must invest even more in the talent pool. The fast growing pool of urban educated youth in Africa is an opportunity but also presents many challenges. Failure to convert this pool into talent and put this talent to work will have consequences. And doing it at the scale required is beyond the capabilities of the traditional systems. So, here again, digital innovation will be key to enable us to address this.
Very much, Tijani. And now we have our final conversation starter. And someone that works with an organization noted for such incredibly transformative activities like the Kigali Innovation City, premium investment, all the way to low-cost ISPs in Nairobi. Alain from Africa 50, please take the podium. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bright, for that introduction. And thank you to the African Development Bank and my brother Solomon and his team for inviting me to contribute to this very important conversation. Look, I'd like to start by saying that I share the excitement of Tijan and Ralph because, in my opinion, the scene is set for the digital economy in Africa to take off. We see steady improvement. We see the regulatory environment which is improving. But of course, a lot more still have to be done. But I think that, everybody acknowledges that there's a divide between the rural and urban areas, but also the poor areas and the rich areas. I do believe that a lot will depend on the cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. So that's why I will talk mostly about public-private partnerships in the digital space, and maybe a couple of examples of projects that Africa 50, my organization, has funded, because we have to show that we are also doing this kind of investment. So ICT infrastructure is critical, has been critical for the continent's development. But of course, the coronavirus crisis has demonstrated that this is urgent needs that we need to address. Digitization and related innovative technologies, they are crucial for the recovery, I believe, but also for the long-term sustainable growth of Africa. Again, the foundations are here. Many African countries are already using digital banking, education, e-commerce, government services. This is quite important, actually, not only to facilitate access to government services, but also to collect revenues, tax revenues, and maybe Minister will talk about it a bit later. And we have the youth population of Africa, extremely digitally savvy, and they're demanding more. So again, the scene is set for this digital economy to take off. I do believe that it requires, again, cooperation between the public and the private sector. The African Development Bank estimate that for every 10% increase in broadband penetration in middle and low-income countries, the GDP increases by 1.4%. So this is serious. So, there is a huge opportunity for us to be investing in a digital economy. Ralph mentioned the $100 billion that needs to be spent to bridge the digital divide. These are some World Bank figures, a third of it for infrastructure. And I do believe that because today government money is scarce, okay, the budgets are constrained, the role of the private sector is extremely important. And how do we do then to attract the private sector? First of all, we have to say that a lot of the ICT infrastructure here on this continent has been financed with private capital, internet service providers, network operators, tower builders, and they're looking for commercial returns. And it's fine. There's nothing wrong with making money as long as we're delivering good services. And the private sector can do a lot more with support from the government. So we need public-private cooperation. I think government should continue to do what they're doing, maybe a bit faster, to create this conducive regulatory framework that will enable private sector to come in faster. Government should accept to take some of the risk that the private sector is not ready to take. And development financial institutions such as the AFDB can help in that front with partial risk guarantees to cover specific risks that the private sector is not willing to take, and then so that we can accelerate private investment to bridge that digital gap. So we do believe there are many benefits for private sector involvement. I won't talk about those benefits, but I also want to say that let's not focus only on the large-scale project, which we do finance at Africa 50. We finance large-scale projects, but we also have to think about early-stage venture capital, blended finance, the kind of innovative financing that Tijani was talking about. This is quite important for us to be able to maximize the impact for ICT investment. So we must find ways to do the big project, but also the small project. One of the approach that we have been advocating at Africa 50 is asset recycling. This is actually targeted to government ministers and civil servants who are in the room. Asset recycling enable government really to leverage, to unlock the money which is invested in digital infrastructure assets, which are commercials. So they could get the proceeds of the concessioning those assets to the private sector and use the proceeds of this concessioning to invest in new digital assets. The name of the game here is to find ways to raise capital to invest in digital infrastructure assets. I also do believe that asset recycling, which the African Development Bank is also supporting, by the way, is also good because it can help attract institutional investors' capital, other forms of capital which are so needed in terms of funding digital infrastructure here in Africa. Just a couple of examples of some of the projects that ourselves at Africa 50 we funded. First, we funded, I think Bright, you mentioned that, Power Internet, which is an internet service providers which connect underserved communities in Kenya. We led the round of financing that Power has just completed, raising $28 million. This is the kind of support that we want because we also need to connect underserved areas. We also invested recently in the data center space. This is another important area to help store African data locally, and we did invest in a company called PEX Data Centers, which is a provider of cloud and carrier-neutral co-locations. The funding will be used to expand PEX operations in Kenya and Ghana, where they already have operations, but also across other African countries. We're building a Pan-African data center platforms. But beyond those two infrastructure assets, we're also building, or at least helping build, ecosystems with Kigali Innovation City, alongside Rwanda Ministry of ICT and Innovation and Rwanda Development Board. This is a public-private partnership where Africa 50 and those two institutions of the government of Rwanda, we are creating an innovation hub with international universities, leading tech firms. What we want to do here with this PPP is really for Africa to produce the technology that we consume. And we are well on our way to doing so. We are going to break ground in the next couple of months or 3. I'm putting pressure on my team so that we can actually start, working, producing those technologies. So these are the kind of things that we are doing, government working with the private sector. I do believe that today, again, I'm optimistic. The trend line is up. There could be ups and downs, but there's a lot of opportunities here, and we have the capital, we have the expertise. We can work with government to make sure that we can do a number of projects. I think if I can say only one thing in closing is to say We just need to go faster and larger because we know how to do these things. We've been doing these things. Now we need to increase the pace, and this is where I would like to finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain. So now we get into the heart of the matter with our panelists on stage. I'm going to start with Olavo. You are Minister of Finance and also Vice PM in Cabo Verde. And we've all been paying attention to some of the important developments on that island, such as the tech park that you've built. My understanding was your hope was this could become a kind of gateway for the African continent. Major multinationals will come to the tech park to help boost competitiveness, and then over time, connect to the rest of the African ecosystem. Can you give us an idea, given the coordinating function that you play, about how you think of a small island's economy's ability to attract international capital and to transform its economy in the way that you've outlined with the tech park strategy?
Thank you. I will speak in Portuguese.
Yes, please.
Okay. Muito obrigado. Agradeço esta distinta oportunidade de estar aqui neste belíssimo país, Ghana, mas também de participar nesta Assembleia Anual do nosso banco, o Banco Africano de Desenvolvimento. Introduzi bem Cabo Verde como um pequeno país do ponto de vista territorial. Nós pensamos que o digital é a oportunidade para se fazer de um pequeno país um grande país. Um país conectado consigo próprio, um país conectado com a sua diáspora e um país conectado com o mundo. E um país conectado com o mundo e consigo próprio é um país de oportunidades. Quero, desde logo, concluir que, para Cabo Verde, ambicionar ser um país desenvolvido, um país com 500 mil habitantes, se não estiver conectado consigo próprio com o mundo, dificilmente poderá ambicionar ser um país desenvolvido. Portanto, para nós, investir no digital é uma necessidade, é uma questão até de sobrevivência. Eu dou apenas aqui 3 indicadores que demonstram aquilo que estamos a fazer no digital em Cabo Verde. Em Cabo Verde, por exemplo, o acesso à água, quando falamos das casas, o acesso à água potável, canalização, cobre cerca de 65% do agregado em termos de casas em Cabo Verde. Quando falamos da eletricidade, falamos de 91,4%. Quando falamos do acesso à internet no alojamento, estamos a falar de valores à volta de 90%. Significa que, desde logo, as pessoas olham para a internet, para a banda larga e para as tecnologias como sendo um bem essencial, antes do próprio governo. O governo tem de reconhecer que a internet, a banda larga, é um bem essencial. Está na educação, está na saúde, está na segurança, está nas próprias tecnologias, está no sistema financeiro, está na agricultura, está nas pescas e está em todos os demais setores da atividade económica. Este é um ponto muito importante para o nosso futuro. Por isso, o Governo está a investir e tem de investir para criarmos as melhores infraestruturas, para, em cima daquilo que Cabo Verde representa hoje, que é a estabilidade económica, a estabilidade política, a estabilidade social, a paz, a democracia, o Estado de Direito, possamos ter um país com infraestruturas tecnológicas de primeiro nível e altamente moderno. Por isso, nós decidimos criar um parque tecnológico com o apoio do Banco Africano de Desenvolvimento para termos um ecossistema de apoio às tecnologias em Cabo Verde que possa permitir atrair grandes empresas, pequenas empresas, médias empresas de todo o mundo para se domiciliar em Cabo Verde, para, a partir de Cabo Verde e através de uma aposta séria no capital humano e nos talentos, possamos criar serviços, desenvolver serviços para Cabo Verde, mas também para a nossa sub-região e para todo o mundo. E nós criamos um conceito de Zona Económica Especial Tecnológica, em que concedemos um conjunto de incentivos fiscais, parafiscais e em termos de residência para precisamente atrairmos os talentos, atrairmos as competências de toda a parte do mundo com interesse em Cabo Verde e que possam, a partir de Cabo Verde, ou até a partir de outras paragens, mas com conexão em Cabo Verde, para que possam depois produzir serviços e vender para todo o mundo. Estamos a investir só nesse parque tecnológico qualquer coisa como 50 milhões de dólares americanos. E temos para os próximos 5 anos, mais de 250 milhões de dólares americanos para investir na modernização das infraestruturas. E estamos, ao mesmo tempo, a fazer uma aposta enorme no capital humano, porque o capital humano é que faz também diferença. Infraestruturas físicas são importantes, mas também nós temos que apostar no capital humano para que possamos ter a melhor educação possível, para que possamos ter um melhor ecossistema com o apoio das universidades, para que nossos talentos possam ser os melhores e possam também criar as condições de atração das empresas privadas, nacionais, mas também internacionais. Penso que é importante dizer que o digital pode ser um grande acelerador para os nossos países, pode ser um criador de oportunidades e pode ser e ter um potencial para a diversificação da nossa economia. E temos a sorte em África de termos um continente com um enorme dividendo demográfico, com uma enorme juventude que quer aprender, que quer agarrar as competências, que quer competir na escala internacional. E nós, Governo, temos a obrigação de ajudar os jovens a criar essas oportunidades. Quero terminar aqui com aquilo que estamos a fazer em matéria de promoção do ecossistema de inovação. Nós somos, em África, estamos no leque dos 10 países com melhor ecossistema para startups. Um ambiente friendly, um ambiente amigo do investidor, com um bom sistema fiscal, um bom sistema financeiro, com recursos humanos altamente qualificados, mas um país também estável, um país credível, um país onde há livre circulação de capitais, onde o capital privado é respeitado, onde o Estado de Direito funciona, um país que é amigo das empresas, do setor privado, e que nós queremos também apoiar as startups para que elas possam criar soluções em todo o setor de atividade económica e possam também ser aqui um acelerador na agricultura, no turismo, na mobilidade, na segurança, nos transportes, no sistema financeiro, na educação e em todos os setores da atividade económica. Queremos contar com o apoio do BAD e também aqui da África 50 para fazermos de Cabo Verde um hub tecnológico para servir Cabo Verde, para servir a nossa sub-região da África e para servir o mundo. Muito obrigado.
I mean, I didn't expect anything less, but you're an extraordinary salesman for Cape Verde, impressive social statistics. I want to jump from West Africa, though, to Scandinavia. As an African of a certain age, your first mobile phone was a Nokia 3310 or something of that sort. So we do have some inspiration from Finland, but I think the bigger inspiration is the fact that Finland was also a late industrializer. In 1950, I think half your economic output was in the primary sector, and in a short period of 30 years, you're already an advanced industrializing country. Now you are in your next transition into a secular economy. We're keen to try and understand what are the lessons from your point of view that another late industrializing region like Africa can pick from your effective movement from one phase of economic development to another.
Thank you very much, and indeed, thank you for bringing up that trajectory of Finland's industrialization. We actually estimate that the carbon positive trajectory of Finland will not be any longer than 80 years, because we were carbon negative or neutral until the 50s when we started industrializing. Then we became positive, and we now have a target of being negative again by 2035, so 13 years from now. It's not too long. Perhaps because we're talking about digitalization here, and we also have a strong tradition in digitalization, I want to make the connection between reaching carbon neutrality and digital. In Finland, what we talk about, and as an economic model nowadays, it's circular economy. So this is of course nothing new. This is talk about the movement from a linear production model where you have input, production, output and waste into a circular model where you try to, first of all, keep products in use for as long as possible, and then assure that all output is also input into something else, and that all waste is also utilized into production processes. So this is essential what we're talking about in our economy, and to which we are striving towards, a carbon neutral circular economy. But here is the interesting bit that relates to the topic of this panel, which is that circular economy is all about networks and collaboration. So, and when you look at today's circular economy business models, they're actually all built on digital. You talk about sharing platforms, where instead of where you extend the use life of a product via sharing, and you usually use some kind of a digital platform and digital devices to do so. And then another business model is product as a service, where instead of owning a product, you rent it for yourself. Well, I think we can all think of something that is staying there, put in all of our garages, and is most of the time unused, not for any useful purpose. So through giving up ownership, I think we could use resources much more efficiently. And here obviously it's transaction via digital means that enable the efficient sharing of products. So it's digital connectivity, which encompasses, of course, all from your infra and networks to services and hardware, devices, and also sensors, IoT, that gives circular economy its true transformative potential. You can collect data very inexpensively. You have real-time flow of information, and thereby you can lower production costs, optimize logistics, and you have less need thereby also for inputs, and you can have longer use life of products. And perhaps to end with, I want to present a sort of a more philosophical question, which is then, if digital is so important to reach carbon neutrality, doesn't it make a whole lot of difference on what kind of principles your digitalization and your digital connectivity is built on? And in Finland, we like to think of that the best model is one that is human-centric. So it's based on people. And for example, us as individuals who utilize digital means, we own the data about ourselves that is in the digital realm and nobody else. Digital must also be inclusive. So we talk a lot about the gender-digital divide, its reality. We talk about the need to take care of people of disabilities and their digital needs. So these are real things for inclusiveness. And then, of course, the last thing is green. Digitalization needs a whole lot of energy. So it makes a difference on how you power your data centers and etc.
In Juha, because you emphasize people-centric development or human-centric development, and Mr. Minister talked about human capital. So I'm impressed by how you're already reinforcing each other's points. Now, Omobola, you know, I've known your work for a decade or more, moving you from the private sector into government, and then eventually now back into the private sector, but with your foot very much firmly in the public sector, as well as the former chair of the Affordable Internet Alliance. My question is how you frame the discussion so far, the interplay between human capital and digital infrastructure. Do you think, you know, there is some kind of optimal framework for how you get infrastructure and the human capital pieces working together?
Thanks very much. Right. You know, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've got to think about both the infrastructure and the human capital at the same time. First of all, let me talk about infrastructure from the point of view of really what the Alliance of Affordable Internet has been doing for the last, I would say, 7-10 years. And it's really, you know, as time has progressed, we've actually looked at, or they've actually looked at very different ways of talking about connectivity. In the past, it was just about having internet in places. Then they talked about, how fast that internet is going to be and how affordable, how much would it cost. So we're talking about, 1 gig should cost less than 1% of gross national income. But the new target that's been set really is very much aligned with with the digital transformation we're all talking about. And so to say that anybody in the world should have what we define as meaningful connectivity. And that means, and I think Ralph sort of alluded to that in his own comments, meaningful connectivity means that you should have 4G-like speed in any part of the world. Because when your internet is slow, it doesn't make any sense. It really is relevant. The second thing is that you have to have a device that can actually access that connectivity fairly well, a smartphone, again, as Ralph has said. The third thing is that it must be affordable enough for you to be able to access it daily. So it means that it's actually affecting your life. You're accessing it for education, for health, for information, whatever it is. So digital infrastructure must be, yes, there's the sort of base stations, fiber, all of that needs to be done. But we need to think about it differently in terms of connectivity and what does that mean for the average African. And, as Ralph has said, or I can't remember who said it was, several tens of billions of dollars need to be put in place to get this digital infrastructure out there. And as you say, it's a case of if you build it, will they come? And this is going back to the human capital side of it, where, the infrastructure is being built. But what is important is that, what is the human capacity development that we need to deliver with that infrastructure? And secondly, I think, how do we as Africans participate in that digital transformation? And I think that second one is the most important one. Because what we're finding is that when you talk about the different startups, Tijan was talking about some of the startups they've invested in, some of the ones that we've invested in as well. One of the biggest constraints to their growth is availability of talent. So capital is coming, and that's great. We need more of it. But the talent that is required to really scale these businesses, to make them more relevant in more than one African country, to get them to be those very valuable companies that are delivering, services and really solving grand challenges that we haven't been able to solve with that technology, that's a big issue. So going back to talent around education, science and technology education in Africa, trying to stem the brain drain that we're seeing right now, because this capital, that's the thing about, these skills are global skills. They're relevant in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Sierra Leone, and they're relevant in the US. So we're finding this sort of brain drain of very talented Africans, either leaving the continent to go and work in engineering roles across in different parts of the world, or even staying in the continent, but working in engineering roles in different parts of the world because you don't have to live in the country that you work in. So I think that's a challenge that African countries really need to solve. First of all, digital infrastructure is great, but it must be meaningful in terms of speed, accessibility, affordability. And second of all, the talent that we need to make sure that digital infrastructure actually delivers the return that we're expecting, we must begin to hone, develop, replace the talent that is leaving the continent and ensure that these companies that we're building will be sustainable because they're sustained by African talent that is actually based, educated, and skilled in Africa.
Now, following that same theme, but taking a slightly more emphatic turn around this issue of equity, inclusion, uniformity of this infrastructural build-out. Because we can build all those things in infrastructure, but if it's concentrated in a few capitals, that's not going to make much of a difference. That takes us to rural Africa. And Monique, you are an expert in how you get certain types of infrastructure services into the rural parts of Africa. So whether we're talking about the rural-urban divide or the digital divide, you've been there. What I'm intrigued about, though, is you use artificial intelligence. You're using high-tech to solve problems for people in parts of the world where many people will argue they just need the basics. Can you walk us through how that pans out, this high-tech and basic?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and thank you for the bank for the invitation. So at the core of digital transformation is digital resilience, especially on the continent. And I'm tempted to say thank God for the COVID, because we've now known that the electricity of the 21st century is the internet. I mean, we've been able to work virtually for over 2 years. The first thing our governments need to understand is if they have to change anything, you have to know what you have to change. And we need young people like ourselves with innovative ideas, products and services that we're developing to be in the room when they develop these policies, because a lot of the times we sit, we have all these ideas, we're being funded by international developmental partners like the African Development Bank, and our governments will develop policies, and you're asking yourself, like, what do they really know what is going on? Then they also have to understand that they need to invest in the digital infrastructure. But in investing in the digital infrastructure, how about you leverage on public-private partnerships? The two have to go together. You leverage on public-private partnerships, leverage on loans, leverage on grants. That's how organizations like ourselves have been able to get into the communities, work with existing systems in place, because there are already systems in place. We're not coming to innovate or change the dynamics in the rural communities. When you work with the systems in place, the people feel included. They give you their time and their energy. They are receptive to whatever form of innovation we are bringing into the rural communities. So what we basically do is we use AI to identify the specific clean energy problems that women and girls who are the primary victims of the energy crisis face. And then with data that we collect, we're able to provide the specific clean energy solutions in terms of solar installations, biogas installations, because we have immense waste in our communities, and to us, waste is wealth. So with the waste, we're providing them with biogas, which is clean cooking fuel. With the solar installations, we're providing them with electricity. First, when there's lighting, then there is development. Then equipping these women now with what we call eco-entrepreneurial skills. So it's basically developing applications that can work offline, so that even without the proper digital infrastructure, they are able to learn. For the illiterate women, they learn with the help of what we call translators. For the girls, we just include our models in their educational curriculum. So you don't come in and you're talking, in all this technological language. No. So there's a system in place. We just work with the system in place. And then after that, the women, after equipping them with these eco-entrepreneurial skills, they get to keep 70% of whatever revenue they make, be it from assembling solar lanterns, be it from collecting waste, and we creating markets for them to sell this waste. They keep 70% of the revenue, we keep 30% of the revenue, and we put them in saving groups. We work with microfinance institutions, because a lot of the times in Africa, we focus a lot on, the banks, the big multilateral institutions, but microfinance institutions, they play a major role when it comes to development from the grassroots level. They might not meet up to the urban level, but from micro SME level, that is already development. That is financial empowerment you're creating for the African woman, and there are other little societal problems that you're solving. So that's how we've been able to work across 8 African countries for over 7 years, and we're the only Pan-African organization doing that till date.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
Now, wow, so most people know Microsoft more as a consumer company, Windows. But those of us that have been a bit closer know you are big in the enterprise space, and you are very keen also on digital for development, whether it's television, white spaces, or whatever. Now, one specific question I have for you, and obviously you can frame that and blow it up as much as you want, but there's an increasing sense that data must be owned by the people that generate it. There's a lot of data nationalism that is emerging. Some call it data sovereignty. Now we have AFTA. At the very least, we should consider the entire continent as one market. Does that make your work in building centralized data platforms like data center and the rest a bit easier? What do you think of that debate?
Well, thank you very much. It's actually a very important question. Just for companies like Microsoft who invest in hyperscale data center facilities, just to clarify to the audience as well, the difference between a hyperscale DC facility versus a data center facility is basically the scale of the investment and the amount of services that come on top of it, thousands of services that would enable governments, enterprises, and even startups to really enjoy the cutting edge of technology. For a company like Microsoft, there are very few companies around the world who basically develop and run those hyperscale DC facilities. For a company like Microsoft to invest in a data center facility in the continent of Africa, we need actually scale. As you can imagine, just a hyperscale DC facility, it is like 2 to 3 football stadiums worth of a DC infrastructure. And as you can imagine, per an installation, that would be hundreds of millions of dollars. For that to happen, you need actually the scale of execution. And to your point, today we have 54 countries in the continent of Africa. There is not a single country that basically allows data to be stored outside what we call data residency rather than data sovereignty. So remember, you mentioned data sovereignty, but actually, if you look at most of the regulations that exist in the continent today, they actually refer to data residency. So they want the data in country. And if that is the case, Microsoft and others would need to invest in 54 different facilities into the continent, which is never going to be the case. Compared to what happens in Europe today with a single market, when they speak about data sovereignty, they speak about the European borders as such. US, LATAM, and others, sort of like they're big trade blocks. Coming back to your point, and by the way, just on that front, Microsoft was was the first hyperscale data center provider to invest in South Africa with our facility in the continent, and then we were followed by a number of our competing players in the field, and all invested in South Africa. And why as well? Because of scale. There is a trade bloc, before I come to AFTA, there is a trade bloc in South Africa, it's called South Africa Development Community, SADC. Even within SADC, see this small trade bloc that sits in the South Africa, even within SADC, the SADC does not have a chapter for common data residency law. So that if the data is stored in a data center in South Africa, it can be used by the Southern African countries as such. AFTA is a much bigger dream, I would say, in my point of view. Before we reach to the AFTA units coming with a data law that allows even a small startup to actually utilize its data across the continent of Africa, I think my at least ambition is that we use the smaller trade blocks within the continent, the COMESA, the ECOWAS, the SADC, EC, we bring those to adopt a common data model to allow such critical investments for the continent of Africa to come. Just to give you an idea as well what type of investments are needed. Africa today, in a recent report, basically requires at least 1,000 megawatts of DC capacity in the continent of Africa with the current laws and regulations that does exist. That basically means, as you can imagine, 3 to 4 to 500 football stadiums worth of data centers to be developed and actually invested into the continent of Africa. This is the scale of what we are actually talking about. And that we have two options, speaking about resiliency in terms of, and actually sustainability as well. We have two options. Either we build it with small data centers scattered all across the continent on the basement of banks and governments and institutions, or we actually start to adopt these great inventions around hyperscale DC facilities, avail the services to the continent, and do it in a very sustainable manner for the continent as well. Thank you.
It's amazing that notwithstanding the very multifaceted discussion we've had, from data centers to rural infrastructure development, all the way to national policy for attracting investment, a consistent theme keeps coming up. And that theme is the extent to which any kind of innovation in the physical layer must be complemented with the policy and other soft innovations, whether in terms of human sociology or in terms of policy innovation. So that is quite remarkable. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to try and weave the threads back again and get to one tapestry. And we don't have the time for a question on the floor, unless there's like a really burning question, but I don't see any hand up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Solomon Quaino of the African Development Bank, Vice President for Infrastructure and Private Sector Development, to wrap it all up for us and weave the themes through into this tapestry that I'm talking about. Not easy.
Thank you, Bright, for that masterful moderation. But I have the chairperson of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank present. And so let me ask, Honorable, would you like to ask a question or make some comments? Because it's very interesting that he made it a point to come here. And I also heard some very interesting facts yesterday at the dinner we had organized by His Excellency the Vice President of Ghana about some fantastic developments in the whole digital economy space in Ghana. For example, essentially banking penetration has gone from 40% to 90% in 5 years, and this is because of the use of the electronic wallets. So this is fantastic. And then I also heard about the fact that you're going to be able to connect, I think, about 5,000, retail pharmacies to essentially do the sort of inventory management that, Tijan was talking about, with Trade Depot. So, and I think there's more. So, can I interest you once again, Governor, to make some few comments? Yeah.
Right, how are you? Great. Good evening, and it is really good to be here. I mean, I guess really, in a sense, as I look at Africa and the type of transformation we require to be able to leverage our own resources, because we have enough of them to do what we have to do, is how we work in the digital space, however we look at it. Either because in finance, I'm interested in getting taxes, or more importantly, we are interested in being quite surgical about the way in which we translate social welfare services for it to be effective and direct, and know that each citizen is being taken care of from cradle to grave. And that's what becomes important. And of course, with regards to the issue of terrorism, etc., we need to know where our people are to be able to provide the type of safety that is required. But I think it's a very difficult adjustment process, and we'll tell you we had a very difficult time implementing, promulgating what we call e-levy, which almost broke the country up into two because of differences in opinion as to what it is, and using historical precedents to predict that it won't work. But we are on that experiment role, and I think it will be instructive going forward as to how we all learn from it. Because I'm not sure that the tax handles we have now are advanced enough to recognize the change in business and the way in which we are going to live our lives. And digitalization certainly offers us a way to deformalize the tax system for everybody to participate in that. And I also firmly believe that when most of us participate in taxation, we then all become much more rigorous of all of us being protectors of the public purse and ensuring that even in our little districts, we care because we have paid. And that may change the sense of citizenhood and the way in which democracy is applied to rid ourselves of the thinking that is some political elite, but then you now, having been part of financing the system, will care enough to protect, what is yours. So Solomon, very important, and I guess our challenge now is how we work with the Microsofts and Googles, etc. But make sure that the type of training that Omobila is talking about, is basically complete with regards to every citizen getting that chance. So that my kid in school in Accra and a kid in Boku up north, at least there'll be 80% compliance in the ability for them to source information and teach them, as opposed to the current inequities of social justice that we have. So technology is going to be key, and I'm really hoping that we can sit down with the big companies to see how their own enlightened self-interest will break through the sense that You need all of that skill before you make your move. We all got to sacrifice a bit to create that world that we have. Because by 2050, Africa is going to be a quarter of the world's population and 850 million youth. There has to be a way to change your models to capture that, so that we have a world in which there's more equity, the common humanity is recognized, but actually leads to better productivity for all of us. So thanks for the session.
Thank you very much, Governor, for that. So thank you very much, conversation starters, Ralph, also Tijan, and Alain Ebobisse, my very good friend and brother, who was able to do this in person. Thank you very much to our various panelists, the two governors from Finland and also Cabo Verde. And also, thank you very much, Monique. Pleasure meeting you and learning about your program. This is fantastic. And YL, good to see you in person. We've had lots of conversations along with Angela as well, so great. And Omobola, my sister, we've known each other for a long time. Our lives are intertwined one way or the other. Thank you for coming. And once again, Bright, pleasure meeting you again. You always have some creative ideas. I'm not going to try to summarize everything, but let me start off with a number of things that Bright said. 2 words, digital resilience. But you also give us actually some very interesting data about the impact on greenhouse gases from going from 3G to 5G. And so the trade-off analysis is really the capex needed broadly across Africa to go from 3G to 5G. Now, this is where we begin to connect digital and resilience. But in addition, we all know that digital is really both an opportunity in itself, especially for our youth, but it's also a great enabler of all our businesses. And let me just touch on a few points that each of you made. So Ralph essentially quantified it for us. I mean, those of us who are bankers, we want to understand the extent of the money we need to raise. So now it's 100 billion. Now the question is, how fast do we raise this 100 billion? How do we deploy it? We have to think about this both as development finance institutions, but also really, in terms of the private sector as well, working with the public sector. Then Ralph actually introduced a point that we may not all have thought about when we think about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We think about really the movement of goods mostly, but we haven't really been thinking about the movement of services. Okay, and this is where he mentioned that regulatory market consistency and harmonization is going to be really key in creating an African digital marketplace, and that we should have our e-commerce platforms and we should harness PPPs, etc. Tijan gave us some good news, which is, we've gone from 360 million of investment to about 5.2 billion of investment in the whole digital space, which is fantastic. But he also told us that examples of projects such as Trade Depot is only scratching the surface because it's only applying to about 0.2% of the markets. This is one of the reasons why we have invested in a program called iDice in Nigeria. And Omobola, you and I have talked about this. And the idea here is to really create the early investment opportunities, using a lot of shared infrastructure, which, the governor from Cabo Verde talked about, the incubators, the tech parks, etc. So we've provided 170 million as part of a $640 million program to really focus on youth entrepreneurship, both in the tech and tech-enabled space, as well as the creative industries. And those of you who know Nigeria know that one of the natural exports of Nigeria is what? Nollywood. And Nollywood is actually gaining traction, gaining quality. My sister Moabudu is really producing globally. Omobola's sister is also producing globally as well. And this is why we're also, looking to use digital and digital innovation to really, support things. Okay, so investing in the talent pool also came out very clearly. And I think, Omobola, you also talked about the fact that the talent pool is a global resource. And so, yes, as it goes outside, we've got to replenish. So that also came out. Len, fully agree with you on PPPs. Infrastructure asset recycling is a great opportunity, and you ended by saying faster and larger. And so that point is well taken. So, Governor, thank you very much. It's good to see a country actually look at this strategically, placing Cabo Verde really as a gateway, and looking to really build, the tech villages and the right ecosystem for a small island nation to actually be the connectivity capital. And the governor from Finland, great to really hear about the circular economy and how digitization is important to that, but also you ended up talking about it should be really about human-centric development. And Omobola, you talked about affordability and connectivity and speed. Monique, great to really hear about how you use artificial intelligence. And Wael actually taught me about what he called data residency as opposed to data sovereignty. And you once again reinforced the point around having to look at regulatory harmonization, at least if we can do this on a regional economic community level, that's a good start. So let me end there by saying this is just the start of a conversation. Abdu, Nick, Uyoyo, what we should do is we should have some periodic, Zoom-based, conversations in this area with the various sorts of experts, so that we can actually also begin to bring partners, along with us that can actually help address what we're now going to call the $100 billion conundrum. Thank you very much once again, and Bright, thanks a lot for your great moderation.
Okay.
Are you Christy?
Yes, but only 1 second. What?
It's okay for the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Africa Day celebration is going to start in 2-3 minutes. Please join us in the main hall. Mesdames et messieurs, la célébration de la Journée de l'Afrique va commencer dans 2 à 3 minutes. Merci de nous rejoindre dans le main hall, dans la salle plénière.